opinions expressed on the show are those of the guests or hosts, and not necessarily those of the advertisers, networks, platforms, or stations. Warning that the content of the show may not be suitable for all audiences, and that viewer discretion is advised. The show does not intend to provide medical, legal, or financial advice, and viewers or listeners should consult with a professional.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio. Thank you for joining us. As always, I'm your host, Jack Carey, and we are broadcasting from deep in the wastelands of the Dakota Territories, places that you've never seen, where weird things happen. And I am your tour guide to the Twilight Zone. And tonight we've got some interesting stuff. The disclosure snowball, as I like to refer to it these days, is continuing to roll. And you guys know that a big part of the show is paranormal in the news. And we've got some interesting updates in the ufology world. Things are beginning to shape up, but something caught my eye, and we don't always just cover the paranormal. We also cover cutting-edge theoretical science because it is really on the cusp of being paranormal. And, this week there was a very interesting series of articles to hit the waves out there, to hit the internet, and these were discussing the scientific findings, current scientific findings, if you will, to make a long story short, being published in journals around the world of some physicists who believe that our entire universe, the whole thing, is actually stuck inside of a black hole itself. And they had some really interesting evidence for it. Part of that evidence is the fact that all of the visible galaxies that they can see out there are all rotating in the same direction. That's something that you would see if you were inside a black hole. And, they also make a big case for us kind of living in sort of a flattened reality. So it's very interesting. Do we live inside of a black hole? I think many of us would not discount that idea too much. Our lives sometimes seem like a giant black hole. And, if we're stuck in a black hole and we're going round and round and there's no escape, and we're just a tiny little speck in a galaxy, which is in and of itself a tiny little speck in the universe, how significant are we? And that is an interesting question in light of tonight's main topic, which is reptilian aliens. So we're going to be talking about the reptilian aliens, and we're going to be, sort of tracing the chain of custody, if you will, of the reptilian conspiracy, knowledge of it. And we're going to find some interesting stuff. Now, I meant to look up a very important quote for you guys that comes from the Emerald Tablet, and I'm going to do that now. And this is a very, very interesting quote that came out of Blavatsky. And I'm going to be talking about where did the idea of reptilians come from, and where is there any real evidence for it? Because in ufology circles, in alien abduction circles, it's a much debated topic. Do reptilian aliens really exist? Because there's two sides of the argument and two sides of the coin, and we're going to be touching upon that. let's see here. I did find a very interesting quote for you guys, and that will fit in perfectly for tonight's conversation. But before we get to the reptilian aliens, let's discuss some fascinating paranormal in the news. News Nation is running, as usual, some articles on UAPs. One of them is titled, Congress Continues to Seek Answers on UFOs. And when we crack that open, we find some very interesting information. I quote, some lawmakers are hoping for more transparency on UFOs as whistleblower David Grush goes to Washington, D.C. for a new role. Grush will be a senior advisor for Representative Eric Burleson, a Republican congressman from Missouri, helping Burleson with issues related to unexplained anomalous phenomenon, and will hold that position for a 4-month period. Goes on to say in June of 2023, Grush made claims that the Pentagon was operating a UAP retrieval program that was being hidden from lawmakers and the public. And if you'll recall, this is the gentleman that had all of the security credentials to prove that he was, in fact, who he said he was. He had the power and the ability to trace down the fact that these deep black programs with UFOs do exist and that they had retrieved so-called biologics from the craft themselves. These were dead alien pilots. It goes on to say a House Oversight Committee hearing on the issue of UFOs was held in July of that year, and Grush and others who said they were former members of the retrieval program testified.
Introducing the UNGA, the non-lethal self-defense platform, lightweight and simple to use. It uses an easy-to-load 5-round magazine and is powered by...
They were former members of the retrieval program testified. Journalist Ross Coulthart said Burleson hiring Grush for this role was a great move toward getting transparency on UFOs from the government. And I quote, there's nothing quite like being in the Congress to be able to get in the ear of different lawmakers to let them know what to ask for, Coulthart said during his Tuesday appearance on News Nation's The Hill. Very, very interesting stuff, guys. So these congressmen are in the know. They've got the scent in their nose, and like bloodhounds, Tim Burchett and a few of these other Congress people like Nancy Mace and Paulina Luna. And apparently this congressman from Missouri are not going to let it go. And at this point, it's only going to take a little bit of pushing. And it looks like they're putting Grush in a position to do that with the Congress. And you're going to see some shocking information come out. Really, really shocking. Now, the Jacksonville Courier out of Florida is running an article with some interesting photographs. Have you seen a UFO in Florida? You're not alone. And there's a huge UFO flap taking place in Florida right now. I know that we have David Campione on the show, and he's down in Florida, so maybe David has seen some UFOs. I don't know, but he has, in fact, written a book on UFOs that you guys will have to check out on Amazon. And let's see here. Probably the most consequential news regarding paranormal in the news is the fact that the Hollywood Reporter and Movie Web are both reporting that Apple has just purchased a UFO film from the Top Gun Maverick team and a U.S. whistleblower. So Joseph Kosinski and Jerry Bruckheimer are looking to repeat the box office success they found with Top Gun Maverick in their latest summer blockbuster, F1. But it looks like the filmmakers are teaming up once again. Kosinski and Bruckheimer's follow-up to the $1 billion grossing Top Gun Maverick F1 is being produced by Apple is set to be the studio's big summer tentpole alongside a co-distribution deal with Warner Brothers. Despite a recent report that came out about how Apple Studios through Apple TV and their theatrically released films was losing money, the tech company is investing heavily in the creative team behind F1. So the Hollywood Reporter reveals that Apple made a deal worth dozens of millions of dollars to acquire a package for an untitled feature film from director Joseph Kosinski, who did Tron Legacy, and producer Jerry Bruckheimer, and screenwriter Zach Balin. The film is described as being centered on the unidentified anomalous phenomenon, previously known as UFOs. Following the box office smash hit Top Gun Maverick, Kosinski reportedly negotiated an 8-figure deal as director and producer, putting him in the same pay range as Steven Spielberg. The film is bringing on David Grush. Again, David Grush makes his appearance, and he was hired by Kosinski and Bruckheimer. So the film is bringing on David Grush as an associate producer and consultant on the film. He goes on to say Grush is a former United States Air Force officer and intelligence official who has claimed that the government is collaborating with private aerospace companies. Grush claims these organizations have secretive special access to programs involved in the recovery of non-human spacecraft and their dead pilots, with the hope of reverse engineering these craft. Grush also claims that people have been threatened and killed to conceal these programs, with various other white-collar crimes having been committed to hide this information. Both NASA and the Department of Defense have denied Grush's claims, but we know, and if you've viewed a film on my YouTube channel titled The Unexplained Murders of UFO Investigators, you will see a ton of evidence for the fact that they have actively been assassinating ufologists for decades. And they have done so illegally in the name of secrecy and trying to hide their nefarious plots from the rest of society. Fascinating. But when you have Jerry Bruckheimer and Joe Kosinski teaming together after having just grossed $1 billion with their last project to introduce a new UAP film, which I can guarantee you will have worldwide distribution in the theaters, that's a huge step towards ultimate disclosure. And eventually you reach a tipping point in our society of disclosure. Eventually people just know. And will that actually be what we have been describing as a type of catastrophic disclosure? How will the public actually digest the news when they finally accept it? So, DailyMail.com revealed U.S. shot and retrieved a UFO orb during a missile test. So that's out there too, guys. So check out Daily Mail. There's a lot going on right now in the ufology world. And what can we say? The disclosure snowball is still going downhill and it's still gaining momentum. It can't happen fast enough for all of us out here in the paranormal world. But we have to remember there's a lot of people that aren't mentally prepared for that change of their reality construct. And that's really kind of where a lot of the battle is. It's in the battle of the minds of the so-called normies out there in normie land that, just don't pay attention to things like the UFO phenomenon. It's just not an important aspect in their lives, and it's not a daily in their face reality But the webbot is assuring us that that's about to change, and that very, very soon, by June into July, the world's attention is going to turn towards the oceans. And I have to remind you that it was Tim Burchett I just quoted about David Grush working with the Congress. And it was Tim Burchett who said that he had personal knowledge that the Navy was tracking an object in our oceans that was over a mile wide. And he said that publicly on News Nation. I've said it in the past. News Nation looks like they're not afraid to report the UAP news. Everybody else is so, I guess, controlled or wrapped up in political discussion that they're not giving it its proper attention. But News Nation is not letting it go. Neither is Ross Coulthart. They're one of their primary journalists, and so it's probably the best mainstream channel out there right now to kind of judge where the public is with disclosure, and that's really interesting stuff. And tonight, tonight's Cryptid Corner is very, very interesting. Last week or the week prior, I reported on a very interesting Dogman encounter that was brought to us by Dr. Lance Hightower, who is based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, my hometown, and he brings us another Oklahoma Dogman encounter. Yet another eyewitness has come forward to report a Dogman encounter that occurred in 2016, and this was in the Cleveland, Oklahoma area. So if you were in or around the mountainous areas of eastern Oklahoma, and yes, Oklahoma does have mountains, the eastern side going into Arkansas and basically the Appalachians, is sort of the foothills of that. And there's approximately 12 million heavily forested acres in Oklahoma. And there's been a spate of Dogman sightings, encounters, and activity going back for decades in time. I have an ongoing Dogman case that has lasted for a couple of decades now, and it was handed over to me by a private investigator dealing with what appears to be multiple Dogman creatures or individuals who are perpetrating themselves as such in the Konawa, Oklahoma area. And this new Oklahoma Dogman encounter eyewitness, is an interesting witness. He checks all the boxes. He doesn't have anything to gain. Really didn't want to put his story out there, but felt compelled to now that so many others have actually told their stories. He was completely honest in his recounting of the event. And he basically, it's a basic encounter. He was leaving his home. He was living in a very rural area. This whole area is very rural, and he was on his way to town, which would be the town of Cleveland. And a few miles down the road, he sees basically a flock of deer, grouping of deer off to the left-hand side of the road. And so he slows the car down to get a good look at them, see if he can see a big buck or something like that. And something out of his right eye catches his attention, and he turns his head, and across the road, positioned in a grouping of cedar trees, was a dog-headed individual that he described as being massive. It was seated on its haunches, and he estimated its height in a seated position to be 6 feet. Said it looked like a German Shepherd, the way they sit completely still and its eyes he described as being like something out of a werewolf horror movie. They were red and vicious looking, and he said when he looked at it, the thing felt like it was looking through his soul. It's interesting because he ends up taking off, but when he was looking at this creature, its markings, its camouflage, if you will, made it look like it was just blending into the cedar trees. The same color of fur that the cedar tree bark was, everything. A ways down the road, after he got scared and took off, he decided to backtrack and go back and see if he could see more of it. When he got back to the same spot, the deer were there, but the creature was gone. Fascinating. So, and there again, in Oklahoma, the last one was in western Oklahoma. This is in eastern Oklahoma, and it's a phenomenon that takes place all over the state, and I might add, all over the country. The Dogman mystery persists, and it persists because we have just like the Sasquatch mystery, the Bigfoot mystery, we have a never-ending body of what appear to be highly credible, completely sane, normal by our standards, individuals who have nothing to gain and who often make profound life changes because of their encounters. So take that into consideration when you're out in the countryside. Keep your head on a swivel. You never know when you might come across one of these creatures. And it's springtime, and this is the time of year when I begin to tell everybody, it's a recurring message I put out there. We're going to discuss a little bit about Lauren Coleman's devil place names. I've got a new book out there, guys. It's called The Devil's Key, and it's all about the idea, the fact that Lauren Coleman, David Paulides, Bruce Cathy, and the late great Ivan T. Sanderson all kind of came across the same interesting thing, and that's the idea that all around the world there are places that have been identified by our ancient ancestors as exhibiting paranormal type of activity, and all of those places over time have garnered what we would call devil place names. And this would be a name like Kill Devil Hills and Devil's Knob and any variation thereof that has some sort of dark connotation usually denotes the idea that in this area there has been unexplained occurrences of some kind. And chief among those occurrences, according to Coleman, is missing people. And a lot of that activity occurs in the spring. And it was through the work of a man named David Paulides, who discovered the missing 411 cases in the National Park System of America, which is a series of hundreds and hundreds of missing people who vanished without a trace, all fitting the same sort of profile. And it's a huge mystery as to what's happened to them. But he identified what today is known as the Berry Picker Cluster. And in all of the missing cases, all of the many hundreds of them that are out there of people who have vanished in the national park system, it's the Berry Picker cluster of cases that reveals to us a singular clue not available anywhere else in the mystery. And we're going to talk about that right after our break.
Not on my watch, our military service members say, as they volunteer to serve. Not on my watch, they say, as they leave their families behind to keep the rest of ours safe. As they move out, stand firm, and take fire. So not on our watch, we say, to the severely ill or injured veterans who can't get the care they deserve, the therapists they need to walk again, the treatment they need to talk again, the lifetime of day-to-day help they need to live full and independent lives. When there's no more government funding, or a nursing home seems like the only option, or everyone says there's no hope for recovery, we won't leave one warrior behind. Not on our watch. Find out how you can do your part at findwwp.org.
In deep dark wood where shadows lie, Bigfoot sneaks with piercing eyes, footprints lodge in the silent night, a beast untamed, it's out of sight. Dogman howls at the creeping moon, sharp teeth flashing come too soon, through the fog in a misty blur, a chilling ground your blood does stir. Strange creatures on a restless night, disappear with the fading light. Time slips, take us out of time, mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what loves, what deceives? Lost in fog, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dogman flowers, Bigfoot roads. In these woods they make their homes. Strange creatures on a restless night, disappear with the fading light. Time slips, take us out of time. Mysteries in the forest ride. Rise, Wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what the forest ride? Mysteries in the forest ride. Wonder where the pines grow tall, echoes from another age call. Time bends, twisting the whispering leaves. Who knows what lurks, what deceives? Lost in fog, we drift away. Different world in the light of day. Past and present blend as one. In the forest where there's no sun. Ghostly visions, they come and go. Secrets hidden we may not know. Dogman prowls, Bigfoot roams. In these woods they make their homes.
Welcome back, everybody, to Paranormal Intelligence Agency Radio at PIA. We explore all things paranormal, crazy conspiracies around the world, and just the occasional odd scientific finding. And I was talking earlier about the black hole universe, but back to the topic at hand here, which is the berry picker cluster of missing people. So, an inordinate number of people that have gone into the national park system to pick fresh berries have gone missing without a trace. They all fit the same profile. One of the main things in that profile is that the scent dogs can never pick up their scent. That really only kind of leaves a few options to us as investigators. And in one of these cases, a clue, I believe a crucial clue, was left at the scene. And I say left at the scene, it was heard at the scene. A family with a young son, a couple with a young son, went to pick fresh berries in a national park, Yosemite, and their son, who was 12, 13 years old, wandered around a small copse of trees, but he was just out of sight while he was picking these berries, and they heard a scream come from him. They described it as being a half-muffled scream, as though something went over his mouth. I would argue that something would had to be a hand, perhaps, but they were just a few steps away. And as they stepped around this tiny copse of trees to see what was going on, he was gone. In an instant, he vanished without a trace, never to be seen again. And I've often wondered what could cause a muffled scream. And, you know, we have to remind ourselves that we are often in the forest, in the deep forest, in places where fresh berries are growing, where we know for a fact there is a species of apex predators, primates that whose DNA show that they are part modern human. And I talk, of course, about Bigfoot. When you overlay a map of Bigfoot sightings on top of the map of missing people, on top of a map of known cave systems, they are all a spot-on match. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. But in the PIA, we have a saying, once is chance, twice coincidence, 3 times it's a pattern. And a pattern always denotes intelligence. So what are we looking at? I've also wondered more than once, is there a way that, interdimensional portals just open up and swallow somebody? Is that possible? And last week I mentioned that we would be talking about interdimensional cryptids, and this is kind of where that ties in. Could be, in some of these cases, be looking at some sort of interdimensional predator of some kind that is watching, that is waiting. Because in every one of these cases, there is the separation factor. There is the so-called first in line, last in line part of the profile. And what that means is that it's either the first person in the group that's in front and kind of leading the way and becomes separated from the group that disappears, or it's the person in the very rear who is following the main group who becomes somewhat separated and then they disappear. In either case, you have to assume that it is something that is watching them and knows when they become separated from the rest of the group. That is pure predatory behavior. And so we are either looking at an unknown predator, Bigfoot, or an interdimensional predator of some kind. In any event, it is ill-advised to travel into heavily wooded areas to pick fresh berries and then to become separated from whoever you're with. I would advise highly against it, and it's sort of, for a paranormal show, it's a public service announcement. Just don't do it. Too many people have gone missing. So that's Cryptid Corner for this evening. I wanted to talk just a moment about cyber prophecy because we've been talking about that a lot in the past few shows. None of that's really changed. It is continuing to unfold just the way it was reported in the show. And this week, we got to see a bit more of the cyber prophecy manifest in that Tim Burchett, and you have to remember the Webbot was predicting that the money that is funding all of these deep black SAP special access programs that have the alien bodies, that have the actual craft and the back engineered technology, they've been getting unlimited funding. The Webbot predicts that funding gets completely turned off. Now we have a News Nation story in which Tim Burchett is quoted as saying that he wants to know where the money's coming from for them to study UAPs because he knows that it's out there and it's being used for that. And he's assigned Doge to find out. So that's the place. Webbot says by late June into July, the spigots that are funding all of these alien programs are turned off and the money just simply dries up. That's the actual mechanism by which disclosure is going to take place, because at that stage you have a gigantic leaking of information that comes out, and there's no impetus anymore from the scientists involved in the programs to keep it a secret. The only impetus really is this new documentary making the argument that we are in a alien arms race with China and with Russia to back engineer and weaponize alien technology, and the fact that our own intelligence agencies have embedded people within the aerospace community who have murdered people, straight up murdered them, to keep all of this a secret. How much do you think they're going to fight to keep that a secret? Of course they are. Using anything and everything at their disposal to try to keep it a secret at all costs. That's the battle that we're fighting. So, interesting stuff. Interesting stuff. Tonight's main topic, though, is reptilian aliens. And, you know, this can tie into the idea of interdimensional cryptids. We don't really know when it comes to the reptilian aliens. The reptilians are something that is highly debated in UFO/alien community circles, people that study these things every day, all day. And so I thought it would be interesting to sort of trace in our society a chain of custody for the reptilian alien conspiracy, and try to shed a little light on what the origins of it are. And where can we put a finger on something and say, this is real right here. This feels real. And that's important. But in my research this week, I came across the work of a professor, Michael Barkin, a political science professor out of Syracuse University, who has traced, interestingly enough, the reptilian conspiracy theory all the way back to a man named Robert E. Howard, who's responsible for writing the Conan the Barbarian series. How interesting is that? Apparently, in the Conan the Barbarian series, there is a race of serpent men, but it goes much, much deeper because Robert E. Howard had connections to another writer whose name was Maurice Doreal. Now, Maurice Doreal knew some things, and he wrote extensively about the reptilian aliens. We don't know, and this was in the 1940s, we don't know a great deal about where Doreal got his information, but it seems to mirror Madame Blavatsky's work, and most people out there today know who Blavatsky is. She was probably the greatest occultist that ever lived, and she wrote a ton of literature known today as Theosophy. And she mentioned in her writings a race of so-called dragon men that lived on a continent of Lemuria and had an entire history of them. Robert E. Howard apparently had exposure to Blavatsky, and he wrote a work called Shadow Kingdom in 1929, and that was published in a magazine called Strange Tales. Blavatsky wrote her work in 1888. And you have to realize that Blavatsky was sort of the precursor to what would come after with the Order of the Golden Dawn and a lot of these other major occult groups that were present at the turn of the century. And it was these groups and Blavatsky herself that really came out of the so-called French occult revival. And these people had access to ancient manuscripts and documents that we can only dream about having access today. So this is where things get really, really interesting. Maurice Doreal claimed that the famous emerald tablets of ancient lore were written by Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth, although he said Thoth was actually an Atlantean priest. And Blavatsky would agree with that Thoth goes all the way back to Atlantis, as does apparently a lot of the cosmology figures of ancient Egypt. It's believed that when Atlantis was destroyed, some of them made their way to what is now ancient Egypt, and that's where a lot of this knowledge became encapsulated. It's also told that Thoth engraved the secrets of the universe onto a series of emerald tablets. And it's on one of these emerald tablets that Doreal and Blavatsky claim is the following passage. In the form of man they move amongst us, but only to sight where they are as men. Serpent-headed when the glamour was lifted, but appearing to man as men among men. Crept they into the councils, taking forms that were like unto men, slaying by their arts the chiefs of the kingdoms, taking their form and ruling over man. Only by magic could they be discovered. Only by sound could their faces be seen. Sought they from the kingdom of shadows to destroy man and rule in his place. End quote. So there's a passage said to be on the emerald tablets themselves. And that's fascinating stuff, because the tablets are talking about the idea that these reptilian aliens had infiltrated humanity, that they were using some kind of so-called magic, which today ufologists believe to be a kind of holographic projection. They have some kind of technology which projects a holographic image of them being human when they're not. It goes on to say in that passage that only through magic could they be discovered. Only by sound could they be seen. That matches perfectly eyewitness testimony to people who say that they've seen reptilian aliens. And it matches with a lot of other ancient lore about how the reptilians may have discovered what Tesla called the secret to the universe: sound, vibration, and frequency. It's through sound, vibration, and frequency, apparently, that they're able to project these holographic reality around themselves, the holographic image that covers up their true reptilian nature. The passage goes on to say that they crept into the councils of men and that they took positions of power all over the world. As many of you will know, that ties in perfectly with the work of David Icke. And David Icke has been out there for many, many years declaring the reality of the reptilian aliens that are preying on humanity. And that's fascinating because it's only in the last couple of years that one of the world's premier remote viewing groups, the Farsight remote viewers at farsight.org, actively targeted a number of targets that were all about reptilian aliens. And their findings really can be summarized into one easily put, fascinating story. And one of their targets was of what appeared to be an operational, right now, as we speak, an operational reptilian base somewhere in the continental United States. They described the base as having what appeared to be normal-looking office kind of buildings on top. They described that there are so-called men in black on the surface level and down in the underground levels of this base. Apparently, it goes down into the ground many, many levels. They say that this is an area that is quite serene, that you, by looking at it, you would never suspect what is hidden underneath. And what's hidden underneath, they claim, is a true show of horrors. And this is where the reptilian conspiracy mystery really kind of takes a turn. I should add that this chain of custody that I was discussing for the idea of reptilian aliens actually culminates in a 1969 abduction episode of a policeman in Nebraska. And in the alien abduction phenomenon itself, the reptilian aliens rarely make an appearance. But here was a man in 1969 who claims, and this was a pillar of the community, family man, churchgoer, policeman in a rural setting in Nebraska, with absolutely nothing to gain from relaying the idea that he was abducted by reptilian aliens. So it's a highly credible case. And from that point till present day, there's not much of an appearance of the reptilians in alien abduction. However, the remote viewers are reporting that they are, the reptilians I mean, directly responsible for what appears to be a huge amount of missing people, and they are the origins of human trafficking going on completely undetected worldwide. They claim that a lot of people end up in this underground facility and that they have and this is where things get really dark, they have machinery which is able to produce a systematic way of torturing humans so that certain certain enzymes and certain different kinds of material are produced within the human body that they find endlessly useful in their society. This is coming out of some of the best remote viewers in the world. It's fascinating stuff. What are we to make of the idea of reptilian aliens? Could that be part of why there's such a huge effort to cover up the alien presence on this planet? Now, all of this really does tie into some research that I did a long time ago, tying Mars to, the inhabitants, the last of the inhabitants on Mars, to the underground alien structures in Antarctica. And it was during that research I discovered that there were CIA-trained remote viewers who had detected and who had targeted Mars many millions of years ago. And they basically said that Mars, in its heyday, had a thriving civilization, but there was a neighboring planet. And the neighboring planet had a reptilian species on it. This was also at a time when the reptilians had colonized different areas of the earth. The Zulu holy man, Credo Mutwa, who was discovered by David Icke, and you have to realize that these Zulu holy men, when missionaries came into Africa and began to convert them, they formed sort of their own free Masonic brotherhood, if you will, to preserve cultural secrets. And Credo Mutwa was one of the last in the line of secret holders. And he openly discussed with David Icke a time when reptilians ruled parts of Africa, and they were known as the Shatari. And this is backed up by, unbeknownst to Credo Mutwa, by a group of CIA remote viewers who were blindly targeting all of this. So Mars and this neighboring planet end up in a feud together over resources, and they begin to have a war. One of the remote viewers made a statement in a trance-like state that I'll never forget, and he said, "The reptilians have fought many battles, and they have won many battles." That's what was going on here. They were handing Mars their hat. They were decimating Mars with nuclear weapons, which it's been proven now that there are vast deposits of xenon-129 on Mars that can only happen through nuclear explosions, the kind that you would get in a nuclear war. As Mars was on its knees and about to collapse and its atmosphere about to go, they launched a super weapon. This super weapon was a planet killer. And when it collided with the planet that the reptilians were inhabiting, it destroyed it completely. And when it destroyed it, that became our asteroid belt. And what this left was a few colonies of reptilian aliens here on the planet who ever since, over time, have slowly taken control. And I'll leave you with this. Look up online a little-known interview between Howard Stern and Billy Corgan, the lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins. Billy Corgan openly admits that someone in the music industry shape-shifted right in front of him. He wouldn't elaborate on who it was or what they shape-shifted into, but he did say it was something not human. And followed up by a Rolling Stone interview in which they asked him the same question, and he reconfirmed that it did in fact take place, but he wouldn't elaborate on it. And I ask you again, is David Icke right? Have they mastered sound, frequency, and vibration? And do they exist in control to such a degree that they even control our music industry? Interesting question. And that's it for PIA Radio tonight. Join us next Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Central, and I will see you on the radio.